When I first met Debbie, I thought I had found someone who shared the same values, dreams, and ambitions as me. We were both at the start of our professional careers, me as an architect, and Debbie climbing the ladder in corporate finance. Our days were filled with long work hours, and our evenings were often spent dreaming about the future, building a life together. As we grew closer, it became clear that we complemented each other in ways that made me feel lucky and fulfilled. We were both young, determined, and ambitious, and those early days felt like we were building something unbreakable. As the years passed, we continued to grow both personally and professionally. We bought a house, spent vacations planning trips we'd never take, and even started talking about expanding our family. Houston, where we eventually settled, became our shared haven. Moving there was like starting fresh in a city brimming with opportunities. It wasn't always smooth sailing, but with each challenge, I thought we were reinforcing the foundation of our relationship. It was the sort of marriage that felt strong until subtle cracks began to appear. I remember the early days after we moved to Houston vividly. The city was sprawling and vibrant, filled with an energy that made every corner seem alive. Though we hardly knew anyone at first, it didn't take long for us to adapt to the fast pace of our new lives. Adjusting to my demanding role as an architect and accommodating Debbie's frequent business trips kept us busy, but the satisfaction of building a life together made it worthwhile. Most of our weekends were spent exploring the various neighborhoods, soaking in the culture, and meeting new people. That's how we crossed paths with Jenny and Trev. They quickly became a significant part of our lives, joining us for dinners and weekend outings, and before we knew it, we found ourselves counting them among our closest friends. Over time, our friendship with Jenny and Trev deepened. We'd often spend hours at each other's houses after a long week, sharing casual dinners, watching movies, or just talking about life. We were all facing similar struggles, juggling careers, relationships, and the inevitable stresses of adult life. It felt great to have friends we could count on, even though both Debbie and Trev traveled frequently for work. The comfort of familiarity helped us cope with their absences, but as I would later learn, there were things happening beneath the surface that none of us saw coming. That Saturday afternoon, we had company, Jenny and her husband, Trev. Since moving to Houston, they had become some of our closest friends. Our weekends were usually spent together, going out for dinner, attending local events, or just hanging out at each other's homes after a movie or a walk. Both couples were at the same stage in life, college graduates in our early 30s, trying to balance student loans, growing careers, and for Trev and Debbie, frequent business trips. Deb was preparing for one of those trips, and Trev had just left our place for the airport to catch his flight to the West Coast, which was part of his work territory. This was our normal. They traveled, and we kept things going. Back home, Jenny and I worked as an accountant and an architect, respectively. Our travel was rare, if not occasional. Usually, only one spouse in each couple was on the road, and when that happened, the other spouse would join the remaining couple for dinner, or a weekend get-together. After Trev said goodbye and headed to the airport in a taxi, I let the women chat in the kitchen while I went out to the garage. I cleaned off my workbench and checked the security system we had invested in after a string of recent break-ins. Our setup included microphones and cameras in every room, all connected to a server in the attic. The system saved everything to the cloud when the motion sensors activated. I could check any room using the app on my phone or any computer I had access to. Out of habit, I checked to make sure everything was working. "How was your last trip?" Jenny asked my wife, Debbie, as they sat together at the kitchen table. "The usual," Debbie laughed. "Work, dinner, a bar, and then eventually some sleep. Is it true what they say about people who avoid their families on business trips?" Jenny's concern for her husband was clear. Debbie paused for a moment before answering. "I wouldn't worry too much, Jen," she replied, taking a sip of her drink. "Trev always comes home to you, doesn't he?" "Yes, but I wonder what he does when he's alone." "If he's alone," Debbie reassured her, "he comes back to you. Don't focus on what happens when he's not there." "What do you mean, Deb?" Jenny asked. "Exactly what I said," Debbie replied. "What happens outside the house means nothing." I was stunned as her words echoed in my mind. What happens outside the house means nothing. What happens when people aren't home? It doesn't mean anything. Did she really just say that? "Debbie, what are you trying to say?" Jenny asked, clearly anxious. But by then, Debbie had retreated into a more reserved tone. "Nothing, Jen," she responded carefully. "Just that you're worrying for no reason. Trev loves you deeply. He comes home to you, and his trips are purely business, nothing more." It was obvious Jenny wasn't convinced by Debbie's response, but she allowed her to change the subject. I left them to their conversation for a while before returning to the kitchen to pour myself a cup of coffee. After hearing that, I wanted my mind to be clear. About 40 minutes later, Jenny said her goodbyes and drove home, and we settled in for the night. I was polite to my wife, but cautious. To say her words made me uneasy would be an understatement. As she went upstairs to take a shower, a flood of thoughts rushed through my mind. Had she cheated on me during her trips? Was this something she had done many times? Or was it just once, recently? The way she had said it was revealing. Her comment wasn't reflective or filled with regret. In fact, there was no fear or disapproval in her tone, just a simple statement of fact, accepting it as it is, without guilt. What should I do? What does any man do in this situation? Could I just talk to her about it? Was I really about to throw away 4 years of marriage? We had even talked about having kids. Had she slept with someone while traveling? How could I be sure a child would be mine? I started thinking about her usual business trips to Phoenix, San Diego, Seattle, and Omaha. Did she have a lover in each city, or just one person? Was he better looking than me? None of these thoughts made me feel anything but disappointment, anxiety, and sadness. The woman I loved had betrayed me. As much as I wanted to believe otherwise, the rational part of me knew the truth. Debbie, with just a slip of the tongue, had revealed her infidelity. I didn't sleep with her that night. She came downstairs to get me, but I pretended to be asleep on the sofa, my face buried in the pillows. She tried to wake me, but I stayed in a deep sleep, and she eventually gave up. I didn't turn to face her. I stayed in that position until I drifted into a restless sleep, until morning came. The first thing I noticed when I began to wake up was the smell of coffee and the sound of her sandals in the kitchen. I opened one eye and saw a cup of coffee on the table. Anxiety washed over me, and I didn't move or speak. I knew I was just delaying the inevitable. When I finally opened my eyes, Debbie was standing near the sofa, wearing only sandals and a robe. Her blonde hair draped over her right shoulder, and she looked at me thoughtfully. I stood up without touching the coffee. She gave me a worried look as I walked past her silently. I locked the bathroom door and started brushing my teeth. I heard creaking sounds from behind the door, signaling she was standing outside. But then they faded away. We didn't say a word to each other that morning, and I was relieved. I wasn't ready to talk. I wasn't scared to confront her either. In fact, I was almost looking forward to it. But first, I needed to know for sure. I needed facts. That's how I operate. I never take a step without knowing what's going on. Grabbing my laptop, I set up in the corner office of our living room. The desk faced the room, so I could work without her seeing my screen. Debbie walked back and forth between the bedroom and the kitchen, but she kept her distance. The silence between us made me angry. Why didn't she ask me what was wrong? Was this part of her game? After calming myself down, I focused on finding private investigators in the cities she traveled to. I filled out the necessary forms, wrote descriptions of what I needed, and used my personal credit card to hire 4 detective agencies to investigate. "Are you hungry?" she finally asked around 2 p.m. I had no interest in eating with her. "No," I replied, pretending to stay busy. She glanced at me from the kitchen, clearly trying to figure out what was wrong, but I refused to make eye contact. Any wife who had nothing to hide would be wondering why her husband had turned his back on her. Any wife who had nothing to worry about. "Maybe we could go out somewhere?" I suddenly said, standing up and grabbing my wallet, phone, and car keys. She looked surprised for a moment, then nodded and reached for her purse. Her phone was already in her hand. She always kept the same number, never let it out of her sight, and it was password protected. As we headed for the door, I let her walk out first, and I stared at her youthful, beautiful figure, a figure that, until last night, I thought belonged to me, just as much as my own body. We always took my car when we went out, so she moved to the passenger seat, waiting for me to open her door like I always did. Given everything that had happened, this was the last thing I wanted to do, but I forced myself. No matter what had gone down before she left on Tuesday, I needed to make sure she didn't suspect anything. I feared I might have already messed everything up. "Sorry about today," I said. "I think I made a mistake on the project and need to do some quick fixes and explanations when I come in on Monday." "About?" she replied, sounding relieved, but quickly caught herself and looked concerned. "Johnson's project." She asked about the house. "I finished that 3 weeks ago." So much for her paying attention during our conversations. "No," I corrected her. "Something for a future project. Did you get the money?" "Yes, I got it. It's all in the bank." "Good. I'll This week, I'll be working on new drawings and correcting my mistakes. Everything has to be perfect. I just hate making mistakes. You're too hard on yourself, she said more calmly once I gave her the expected explanation. Everyone makes mistakes, I almost said. That's for sure, but I held back. We talked about random small things and eventually about bills. Meanwhile, I was thinking about how I'd have to go to bed, knowing I couldn't get away with pretending to sleep on the couch again. When we got home, I took a shower and got into bed with my tablet, trying to read. But I just stared at the same page for 30 minutes while Debbie showered and then left the bathroom. She put on her robe, something she did when she was undressed underneath, signaling she wanted Zex. We had Zex. I remembered the last time we made love, the last time she was truly in love with me. She lay next to me in her robe, and I kept pretending to read. She placed her hand on my thigh and moved closer. "Are you mad at me?" she finally asked. I didn't respond immediately, but turned to study her face, looking for any sign. "I found your pills in the bathroom. You're taking them again." She froze at my comment. "Yes, I know," she said. "I'm really sorry. I thought we'd wait a few more months." I nodded, not wanting to make a big deal out of it. "No problem," I replied. "You're crazy," I added. But it wasn't concern. It was more like frustration. "No," I said. "I don't want a baby right now either." I didn't say, but I thought I did with you. She stayed quiet for a few moments, then moved her hand away as I lay still. After a few minutes, she turned over and turned off the light on her side. I listened to her breathing. I got up, took my tablet, and left the room. "Carson," I heard her say, but I closed the door and went back to the sofa. The next morning, when I woke up, she was already up and dressed. It was 6 a.m, time for my run. She was ready for work. "I made you coffee," she said. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but held back. She probably realized by then that I was upset. "When did you find out about the pills?" she asked. I wanted to say yesterday, but I didn't want her to think it was too recent. "Last week," I lied, no longer caring that I was lying to her. "And you didn't say anything? You didn't ask me what I thought about it?" I replied, "That's all No problem, Deb," I said. "If you don't want a child with me, then I don't want one either." She seemed like she wanted to respond, but I walked past her. "I'm late," I added. I needed my run. I needed the solitude to clear my head. Running had always helped me focus, starting in junior high, then high school, the Army, and later in college. Running always cured my distraction and self-doubt, both as a young man and as an adult. Now, as a married man, I was considering divorce. That evening, she came home and made dinner. Out of politeness, I sat with her and ate. I barely finished my meal, but I tried to be polite. "Can we talk about the baby when I get back from my trip?" she asked. "If you want," I replied. But all I could think about was what she had said to Jenny. What happens outside the home means nothing. The next morning, she was waiting for me to wake up. She was dressed for her trip, her bag and coat by the door. "Are you going to be okay while I'm gone?" she asked. "I'll survive," I answered. "I always do this, Carson," she said. "I love you." I nodded politely. She noticed the pain on my face, and I saw her wince. I think I heard a sob as she rushed out the door, leaving me staring after her as the car started and drove away. That day, I went to see a lawyer about getting a divorce. Since we had no children, all that remained was to divide the property we had accumulated since our marriage. However, infidelity could factor into the division of assets. We didn't have a prenuptial agreement, which in hindsight was a mistake. But if the detectives uncovered something useful, I could end up with most of it. The lawyers would battle it out in court, dragging the case for more fees. What a mess. Jenny had been texting and leaving voicemails, but I wasn't ready to talk yet. Maybe I'd stop by and see her later. But she beat me to it and showed up at my work, waiting by my car. "Why haven't you answered my calls or messages?" she asked. "I've had a lot on my mind," I replied. "Take me to dinner and then home," she said. "We need to talk." When I reminded her of my wife's remark, "What happens when people aren't home means nothing," Jenny nodded and looked at me. "Where is she today?" she asked. "In San Diego," I answered. "At least that's what she said." "Did you call her at work?" she pressed. "No," I admitted, feeling foolish. "Maybe you should have," she replied, "because I did." I looked at her for a moment. The following Friday, Debbie returned from her trip. First, she went to work, then came home. By that time, I had already made dinner and set the table. "Oh my God, honey," she said excitedly. "You really went all out." She rushed over to kiss me. It wasn't a passionate kiss. but the kind that married couples often exchange, even in public. I let her kiss me, and it was quick. No awkwardness lingered. In that moment, I thought this kiss and the warmth of her hand on mine might be our last. "Trev and Jen are coming over for dinner," I said as I checked the stuffed peppers in the oven. "Trev and Jen?" she asked, surprised. "Yes, they'll be here tonight." I could sense her unease. "I thought you and I—" She trailed off when she saw me turn and give her a polite, disarming smile. "I guess I'll go change," she said, heading to the bedroom to take off her business suit. She had attended her last meeting that morning in Omaha, then flew home and stopped by her office before returning. It was clear she had planned to take a shower, have dinner, and relax after a long, stressful week. I checked my phone one last time for any messages from Jen. One had arrived just 5 minutes ago. I heard the shower upstairs turn off. If all went as planned, Deb would be ready just in time for our guests. "They're on their way," I called up to her, but there was no response. I could guess why. Seeing them was the last thing she wanted. She came downstairs wearing jeans and a white t-shirt, the straps of her pink bra visible underneath. She had on flip-flops, the kind we both wore when we were relaxing at home. She smiled nervously at me and put a hand on my shoulder. "How can I help?" she asked. "I've got wine chilling in the fridge," I said, checking the stuffed peppers again. "Dinner will be ready in about 15 minutes. "It smells wonderful," she said. "What's in the pot?" "Orzo pasta," I replied. She looked sad as she nodded. It was the dish I had made for her on our last anniversary after we fell in love with Greek food on our European honeymoon. The memories made me sad, but this evening had to happen, and this was part of it. The table was set for 4, 2 on each side. She glanced at me briefly before taking a bottle of Zinfandel from the fridge, opening it, and inhaling its aroma. "Can I ask?" she started to say, but the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," I said, and left her in the kitchen. I whispered to myself, "It's showtime." I opened the door to our friends who were standing close by. Trev looked a bit uneasy, but Jenny gave me a knowing smile before leaning in and kissing me on the lips right in front of him. "Hello, Stallion," she said as she pulled away and walked past me. Trev didn't seem surprised by our public display of affection. "Hi, Trev," I said, smiling, though it wasn't a grin. "Come in, Carson," he replied, entering the house. Jenny and Debbie were already chatting in the kitchen when we joined them. For the first time in a long while, I noticed Trev scanning the room. His eyes moved from Jenny to Deb, and then to me. He looked like a man trying to piece together what was going on. "We're having a European-style dinner tonight," I announced. "Jenny's sitting with me, and Deb will sit with Trevi." Trevor and my wife exchanged quick glances before looking away when Jen giggled. "I think I like this. A European-themed evening, from the food to the seating." "What else do Europeans do?" she asked with a raised eyebrow. Trevor and Debbie remained silent as they sat next to each other, clearly uncomfortable, while Jen kept chatting away, being her usual self. Inside, I almost wanted to laugh. "Europeans share more than just seats at the table," I replied, grinning at Jen, who grinned back and laughed. "They swap spouses or have open marriages." "Interesting," Jen said. "What do you think of that, Trev?" He tensed up. "I wouldn't like it," he replied quickly. My wife flinched slightly and then looked away. "I don't know, Trev," Jen responded. "Maybe the Europeans are onto something." Once again, my wife and Trevor exchanged uneasy glances. As I served the food, I poured everyone a glass of wine without giving them the chance to decline. They'd need it soon enough. As we ate, Jen complimented the dish and how well it was prepared. Debbie and Trevor politely agreed, but it was clear they were on edge. "How was your trip, Trev?" I asked as we continued eating. Both he and my wife stopped mid-bite, almost in sync. It would have been funny if it weren't so sad. With every passing minute, the weight of realization grew heavier. The only thing that kept me calm was Jen's hand resting on my thigh, not in a sexual way, but as a soothing gesture. "Same as always," he replied, "meeting clients, visiting our regional reps, then on to the next city." "What about you, Deb?" Jen asked. "Pretty much the same as Trev," she answered. "We both do similar work, just for different companies and clients." By now, they were both just picking at their food. It would have been almost humorous, but the situation was too grim. I refilled their wine glasses once we stopped eating, which really meant they'd lost their appetite. Jen and I collected the plates. Debbie offered to help, but I stopped her. "You and Trev just got back from a trip. Go relax in the living room. We'll join you in a few minutes." "Okay," she said. her smile forced and her eyes filled with worry. Trev looked like he wanted to say something to his wife, but she excused herself to the bathroom. I watched as they walked into the living room, exchanging nervous, questioning glances. They might have whispered to each other, but I couldn't hear it, though I could guess what they were worried about. When Jen came back, we joined them. "So, you two aren't interested in a European open marriage?" I teased with a grin. Jen joined in, laughing. Debbie and Trevor gave nervous laughs, treating it like a joke. "Too bad," Jen teased. "They're such prudes. Let me show you something I found this week." "I think you'll like it," I said. "What is it, a chick flick?" Jen asked, pretending to be excited. "It has a little of both, masculine and feminine aspects," I replied, turning on the TV and pulling up a file I'd saved on my hard drive. The screen showed a sunny coastal city, then cut to a naval base as the camera followed a car pulling up behind a taxi at a hotel. Trevor hesitated, but Debbie recognized the hotel just before the video showed the two of them exiting the taxi, holding hands as they entered the building. By now, shock was written on their faces. The camera followed them as they checked in and walked to the elevator with their luggage, still holding hands. As the elevator doors closed, they leaned in for a kiss. "Carson, stop," Trevor said, but Jen cut him off sharply. "Shut up and watch," she commanded coldly. "Both of you." I glanced at my wife, whose face was now full of panic and shame. Her lips trembled as she tried to look away from the screen. The video shifted to a shot inside the hotel room, where Debbie and Trevor were both undressed, and she was kneeling in front of him. I couldn't help but think, you would cheat with someone like him? "Screw you, Carson," Trevor finally muttered, but Jen quickly shut him down with a slap and a glare. "You liked that, didn't you?" Trev asked. "Do you ever feel just as good with him sometimes?" My wife's expression changed. "I told you not to mention Carson when we were doing this," she said. "Why not?" "Feeling guilty?" Trevor shot back. "I just don't want to talk about him. You're liquidating the mood," she replied. After that, they lay down on the bed and the video went on for almost an hour. Eventually, they both took a nap. Deb was the first to wake, lying with her face turned away from Trevor. When he woke up, he reached for her, and she didn't resist as he rolled her onto her stomach. Jen, having seen the video before, looked at her husband with a cold, detached expression. He was angry, but resigned to seeing the evidence of his betrayal. My wife, on the other hand, had stopped watching and was quietly sobbing into her arms. The faucet turned off. Trevor glared at me while Jen came over and sat next to me. "Well," she said, "that was quite revealing, wasn't it?" Debbie finally looked at me and asked, "How did you find out?" That was all she said. I turned the screen back on, just as expected. Last week, when you and Jen were talking in our kitchen, I replayed the conversation between my wife and Jen. "Jen, it's true what they say about people who are away from their families on business trips. I wouldn't worry too much, Jen. Trev always comes back home to you, doesn't he?" "Yes, but I wonder what he does when he's alone." "If he is alone, Jen, don't focus on what happens when he's not there." "What do you mean, Deb?" "Exactly what I said. What happens outside the house means nothing." For added effect, I replayed the last line 3 times. "What happens outside the house means nothing." "That's what gave you away, Deb," I said. "It made me suspect you were cheating on me. I didn't know who it was with, but I realized you were allowing yourself to cross that line. I already had my doubts." Jen jumped in. "The way you two always managed to cross paths during your trips, how you sometimes avoided talking to each other, it all seemed suspicious." She turned to me. "It's funny how they were so guilty tonight, constantly checking on each other. Both of you were pathetic." "I hired investigators in all 4 cities you traveled to," I said. Deb winced, shaking her head as she sobbed again, realizing what was coming next. The next video showed Deb with another man at a bar, followed by them heading toward a hotel room. "Oh, you witch!" Trevor shouted at her. "Did you cheat on me too?" Jen and I couldn't help but laugh at his outburst and the desperation on both their faces. "But wait," I said sarcastically. "There's more." The video continued, now showing Trevor in a room in Las Vegas with a slender, muscular black woman. "My husband never does this for me," the woman said. "I'm glad to help," Trevor replied, as the woman wiped herself with a napkin. I couldn't hold back and clapped my hands at the absurdity. Debbie shook her head in disgust. "What a sight," Jen added. "Cheaters cheating on each other. Priceless footage." We all fell silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. Deb was the first to speak. "Carson," she said, her voice trembling, "what's left for us?" I turned and looked at her seriously. "You know, Jen and I had a few days to talk and come to an understanding. We're both reasonable people. Neither of us are prudes. If either of you had brought up the idea of an open relationship, maybe we could have talked about it. Honestly, I even considered asking you, Deb, but you chose a different path, didn't you? You could have asked me openly so we could have made a decision together. Instead, you chose to be selfish, to do what you wanted behind my back. You lied and betrayed me, us. You betrayed our marriage. How am I supposed to forgive that? How can I move forward with someone who thinks it's okay to do whatever they want when I'm not around, and not just when you're traveling? How long has this been going on at home?" "I bet they already did," Jen said. "I heard from people at his work that your wife took him out to lunch several times." Both Debbie and Trevor turned away, unable to face us. "So what do you want?" Trevor finally asked. "Well," Jen said, "it looks like we have everything we need. Neither of us has children, so we only have to deal with dividing the assets. And since infidelity matters in Texas, you're both screwed. Literally. Give me your phones. Both of you," I demanded. "Unlock them." Deb winced, but handed hers over, unlocked. Trevor hesitated, but Jen walked over and snatched it from him. "It's not even locked," she said, handing it to me. "Give me a minute. I'll check his cloud account." It took a few minutes, during which I looked through Deb's phone. She hadn't written anything down, but her gallery showed pictures of Trev and another man. "Nice, Deb," I said, shaking my head as she looked away. "Here's how this is going to go. I can't trust you anymore. There have been too many lies for too long." While I was talking, Jen was calling out. "Let's go," she said, glancing at what was happening. "You both work for companies that have moral standards. Have you forgotten that?" I saw a look of panic on their faces. Both your bosses and their legal teams would be extremely disappointed with your behavior. One of them is a skirt chaser himself, but after his company had to pay for one of his indiscretions, he now lets his HR and legal departments go after those who break the rules. This must be your boss, Trevor. "Damn," he muttered. "That's why you got into trouble, idiot," Jen told him. "I gave you everything you ever wanted in bed. I shared all of myself with you and never held back, unless I was sick. You betrayed me, Trevor. It's over between us." "Well, not yet." "What do you mean?" "Well," I chimed in, "divorces are inevitable, and both of you will sign papers giving us 70% of the assets. If you fight us, your videos will be shared with your families, friends, and employers." "Carson," Debbie looked at me with pleading eyes, "please don't. Maybe we can figure this out." "Seriously, Deb," I grinned, "if you saw a video of me having sex with Jen behind your back, would you try to work it out?" "Please give me a chance," she begged. "I did, Deb. I snapped. You and I were in trouble before you left on your stupid tour, and you went ahead and did it anyway. You decided to start taking the pills without discussing it with me. We are married. We agreed to live together and make decisions together. You betrayed my trust. Even before you cheated on me with him or anyone else, you lost respect for me, so this was easy for you. I just want to know one thing. Why?" She looked away and then back at me. "Before you, I had no experience communicating with other men. One guy finished in less than a minute. Carson, that was my experience before you. I wanted to try others and see what it was like." I stared at her in disbelief. "You should have thought about that before marrying me," I replied. "This is when people explore, not after they tie the knot. Marriage isn't just a commitment. It's a contract between two people. It means it's just the two of them against the world, and that marriage is exclusive until both agree otherwise. Well, you knew about leaving everyone else behind." She wanted to respond, but paused, then spoke again. "Carson, I wanted to go out and have fun before the wedding, but you showed up, and I didn't want to risk losing you. The first few years were great between us, but this past year everything resurfaced. I started to wonder what other men might be like. It wasn't love. That's why I had you, just for sex. That's all I wanted." I shook my head in disappointment. "All you had to do was ask me, Deb. All you needed to do was talk to me at home. We could have found people we trusted. Damn it, I would have let you sleep with that guy if we all agreed since we were friends. Instead, you two went behind our backs and violated my trust. Debbie, with trust and love comes respect. You lost all respect for me by sneaking around. We could have figured this out together, but you chose to act without me." Jen nodded in agreement. "That goes for you too, Trev," she said, "especially after we talked." I was taken aback as Trevor looked away, and Debbie stared at Jen and Trevor in shock. "Did you do this?" Debbie asked. "What did he say?" "That prick told me he would never share me with Carson and that he would leave me if I brought it up again or he caught me. Can you believe it?" Debbie shook her head at Trevor and then pushed him away, punching him. "You stupid idiot," she said as he tried to shield himself from her second and third blows. "When we started, I said we should bring them along, didn't I? But you insisted we couldn't do that and that they would abandon us. I listened to you. Now look where we are. You've turned into a strumpet, Deb." "It didn't take long," Trevor said angrily. "And after me, you started looking for others. So don't act innocent. I remember our first kiss at Christmas last year. You let me kiss you for a minute or two while Jen was in the bathroom and Carson went out to the car. It took less than a week to get you into bed." I remembered that night. Everything seemed so perfect. We were celebrating with our best friends, and while his wife and I were out of sight, he and my wife were kissing. "I screwing hate you," she shot back at him. "It's screwing mutual," he replied. Jen and I watched them glare at each other for a few minutes, filled with contempt and distrust. Was there any hope left? It looked hopeless. Too many lies and too much betrayal had occurred. If we had kids or were older, I might have wavered and thought about it. But I was young, and there were no children tying us together. I wanted to leave. The doorbell rang again. This time, Jen answered it. She returned with a woman carrying 2 bags and a smartphone. "Deborah Madison Canick?" she asked my wife, who nodded. "You have been served." The woman handed her an envelope and took a photo. "Trevor Gunderson?" she asked, looking at Trev, who nodded reluctantly. "You have been served." Debbie was now openly sobbing, clutching the papers. Jen turned to me and shrugged before approaching her husband. "It's all over between us. Go home, pack your things, and leave. I never want to see you again, understand? If you say anything, the video goes to your parents, your workplace, and anyone you call a friend. Got it?" Deb didn't move, but then turned to me and did something unexpected. She knelt down and crawled over to Jen and me. "I beg you both, please forgive me and give me another chance. I know I messed up. It's all my fault. Do whatever you want with me. Just don't throw me out onto the street. Carson, please, Jen, talk to him. I'm begging you both." Debbie looked into my eyes, pleading. I realized this was my test as a man. Yes, I loved her. No matter how betrayed I felt, I still loved her. But what she did was unforgivable. Still, throwing her out like that felt wrong. But I would never trust her again. "Jen is moving here and into my bedroom," I said, locking eyes with her. I saw her wince. "I understand," she choked out, fighting back tears. "I deserve it. I need to talk to her about you. Is that clear?" The door closed as Trevor left and Jen returned. "What are you going to do with her?" she asked. "You know she can't be trusted, right?" "I know," I replied. "I'm not going to." Debbie looked at us in despair. "Please," was all she said. "Shut up," Jen replied, pushing her back to the floor. Debbie lay there for a second or two, then got back on her knees. "Carson, please don't divorce me." "Get your things and go, Debbie," I told her. "Pack for at least a week, and we'll discuss how you can get the rest later." When she nodded and began to cry again, her face reflected sadness and reluctant acceptance. She slowly got up and went to the bedroom to gather her belongings. 40 minutes later, she had packed 2 suitcases, a travel bag, a laptop case, and a purse. Jen and I watched her load everything into her car, standing side by side as she drove off for the last time. She reached out to me, but I pulled away. She sobbed again and left in tears. "Everything went better than we thought," Jen said, leaning closer to me. "They brought this on themselves," I added as we watched my soon-to-be ex-wife's car disappear into the distance. "Every spouse has the opportunity to cheat. Not everyone takes it." "Funny," Jen said, returning to me. "What's so funny?" I asked as she began to undress. "Some people think they have an open marriage, but they forget to inform their spouse about it." "Do you want an open relationship?" she asked as I pulled away. "That feels too much like dating others," I replied. "Do you need it?" "I just need something different every now and then, Carson. It's been a while since I've had any variety, and sometimes I may need a change," I answered. "We agree," she said, breathless. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. Jen and I both received the 70% we had requested. Jen sold her house, and I took out a loan to pay Debbie 30% of the house. In one day in court, all financial and legal issues were settled, but not Debbie's pain and guilt. She lost everything except her job. Her parents eventually found out when she started preparing them for the possibility that I might send them videos and photos out of spite. I never did that. Trevor simply vanished after his divorce from Jen was finalized. She had enough money to buy him out, but the last thing he told her was that he would be in touch. It's been 2 years, and we haven't heard a word from him. Debbie still works and travels. What she does doesn't matter to me anymore. The other day, Jen and I were at a cafe when Debbie walked by, focused on her phone. Jen and I live together, but we both fear serious commitment. It's been a year since my divorce, and my memories of Debbie are fading. Jen and I are discussing traveling around the world. Recently, I received a letter. Hello, Carson. I hope you are doing well. I'm trying to live my new life, but to be honest, it's not easy. I miss our time together. I miss you and us. I've had so much time to think about what I did to you, to me, and to us. I ruined everything by believing I deserved to have everything I wanted, regardless of the consequences. In my pursuit of sexual exploration, self-indulgence, and self-fulfillment, I hurt the man I loved and lost my marriage. Not to mention, I helped destroy Jenny and Trevor's marriage. It would be easy to blame him for what happened, but we both know that's not true. Everything I did was my choice. No one forced me. I owe you an apology, Carson. Not just for ruining our marriage and our life together, but also for, as you pointed out, losing respect for you. But before that, I lost respect for myself. I fell for the belief that I deserved the pleasure and experiences I thought I had missed out on. Now, I have the experience of divorce behind me that I never expected. Nothing about it brings me satisfaction or comfort. It's torn me apart. I heard that you and Jen are still together. I wish you both happiness. But to say I'm not jealous would be a lie. Take care of yourself and Jen, your unfortunately ex-wife. With love, Debbie. P.S. Loneliness sucks. What happens outside the home means a lot. I folded the letter and set it aside, staring blankly at the table. Debbie's words echoed in my mind. She admits it, but it doesn't change anything. It's been too long, and what's broken cannot be repaired. Jen noticed my silence and walked over. What's wrong? She asked. I slid the letter toward her. She glanced at it, quickly skimming the contents. Debbie? She asked, and I nodded. She's still stuck in the past, I replied. Even now, she doesn't fully grasp that what she did was more than just selfish pleasure-seeking. It shattered everything. Jen gave me a sad smile and sat down next to me. Some people never learn until they lose everything. We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the past still lingering between us. Eventually, Jen spoke up. We're doing better, though, aren't we? I nodded. Yeah, we are. We weren't perfect, but we had each other, and that was enough for now. Debbie's letter reminded me of everything we'd gone through, but it also reaffirmed that we had made the right choices, painful as they were. There was no going back, and I was okay with that. As Jen rested her head on my shoulder, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. The letter was the final thread of my old life being severed. We would move forward, leaving behind the tangled web of lies and betrayal that had ensnared us all. The future, while uncertain, felt a little brighter. Let's plan that trip around the world, I said quietly. Jen looked up at me with a smile. I thought you'd never ask. The weeks following my divorce were a strange mixture of relief and confusion. It was as though I had stepped out of one life and into another, yet my mind couldn't fully disconnect from the old world. The echo of Debbie's words in that letter, her regret, her sense of loss, kept pulling at me, even though I knew nothing she said could change what had happened. You can't undo betrayal, and no apology, however heartfelt, erases the wounds left behind. I had learned that the hard way, but there was a kind of peace in finality, too. The knowledge that this chapter of my life had truly ended allowed me to breathe a little deeper, sleep a little sounder. I had spent so long caught up in the web of doubt and distrust that I didn't realize how exhausting it had been, living with the constant weight of uncertainty. Now, at least, I had clarity. I knew what had happened. I had made my decisions, and the path ahead was mine to choose. Jen was by my side, through it all. We both knew that our relationship had been born out of pain, out of the broken pieces of our previous marriages, and neither of us tried to deny the complexity of that. But, in a way, it made us more honest with each other. We had seen the worst of what relationships could be: deception, betrayal, lies, and neither of us had the energy for more of that. So we were raw with each other, sometimes uncomfortably so, but it felt like the only way forward. It wasn't long before we started talking seriously about that trip we had mentioned. Traveling the world sounded like the perfect escape, the perfect way to leave behind the wreckage of our old lives and embrace something new. I hadn't realized how much I needed that. Something that didn't remind me of Debbie, of Trev, or of the countless lies that had torn our marriages apart. We sold what we didn't need, packed light, and booked our flights. First stop, Europe. Jen had been before, but for me it was new ground, and I was excited. I wanted to see it all, the narrow streets of old towns, the rolling hills, the vineyards. More than that, I wanted to experience life in a way that felt untainted, unburdened by the ghosts of my past. Jen felt the same. We were both tired of looking over our shoulders, tired of second-guessing every conversation, every glance. Our first weeks in Europe were blissful. We traveled from city to city, Paris, Florence, Santorini, taking in the sights, savoring the food, enjoying the simplicity of being together. There were no expectations between us, no demands. We were just two people trying to live in the present, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about what had been or what might have been. I was simply living, yet in the quiet moments when Jen would fall asleep next to me in some quaint little hotel, I couldn't help but think back to Houston, the city that had been home, the city where it all unraveled. Debbie's letter had brought it all back, the good times, the laughter we had shared, the plans we had made for our future. It was hard not to feel a pang of sadness when I thought about how it had all ended. But that sadness was different now. It wasn't the gut-wrenching grief that had consumed me in the beginning. Now, it was more like a distant ache, a reminder of something that had once mattered but no longer did. One night in a small seaside town in Greece, Jen and I sat on a terrace overlooking the sea, the moon casting silver light across the water. We hadn't spoken for a while, each lost in our thoughts. Finally, Jen broke the silence. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. I didn't need to ask who she meant. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Not in the same way I used to, though." Jen nodded, tracing the rim of her wineglass with her finger. "I get that. I think about Trev too, but it feels distant now, like it happened to someone else." "Yeah," I agreed. "It's strange, isn't it? How something that was once your whole life can just fade." Jen smiled softly. "Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that means we're healing." I thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, maybe it does." We sat in silence for a while longer, watching the waves crash against the shore. The weight of the past didn't feel as heavy anymore. It was still there, but it wasn't suffocating me. I could breathe. As the weeks turned into months, Jen and I continued our travels, moving through Europe and beyond. We visited ancient ruins, hiked through mountains, and wandered through cities where no one knew our names or our stories. It was freeing, being somewhere where the past didn't follow us. We were just two people, exploring the world together, and that was enough. But even as we moved forward, I couldn't help but think about Debbie's letter from time to time. There was something in her words that lingered, her admission that in her quest for freedom, for sexual experimentation, she had lost the very things that truly mattered. It was a lesson she had learned too late, and while I couldn't forgive her for what she had done, I could at least understand the emptiness she must have felt. It didn't excuse her actions, but it made them make a little more sense. As we stood on a cliff in Santorini, looking out at the vast expanse of the Aegean Sea, I felt a sense of closure. The letter had been the final chapter, the last tie to the life I had left behind. Debbie had made her choices, and I had made mine. There was no going back, no repairing what had been broken, but that was okay. Not everything could be fixed, and not every story had a happy ending. Some just ended. Jen turned to me, her eyes bright with excitement. "So what's next?" she asked, a smile playing on her lips. I smiled back. "Wherever we want to go," I said. "The world's wide open." And it was. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my life was mine again, like the future was something to look forward to rather than something to fear. The pain, the betrayal, the heartache, they were all part of my story, but they didn't define me. I was moving forward, and that was all that mattered. Jen reached for my hand, and together we walked down the cliffside path, the world spread out before us, full of possibilities. We had left Houston behind. We had left the lies and the betrayals behind. Now, it was just us, carving out a new path, one step at a time. And as the sun set behind us, casting a golden glow across the horizon, I realized that I was ready for whatever came next. Ready to live, ready to love, and ready to finally let go of the past. Because sometimes the only way to truly move forward is to leave behind what no longer serves you. And that's exactly what we were doing.